Hello everybody, this is Adam from Titanic Myths and Superstition. Today we're going to be talking about a really sort of unusual one, I guess. Did JP Morgan sink the Titanic deliberately? I guess before we get started, I'll do some housekeeping here. Guys, I am on all social medias, well, not all of them, but a couple of them. Instagram is Titanic MNS, I think it is. Yep. So Titanic MNS, and on Facebook it's Titanic MC, and we also have a Patreon page, guys. So if you really like what I'm doing, and look, I've got about 215 listeners, and I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but to me, with 4 episodes out, and this is going to be number 5, that is awesome. I'm really loving the support that I'm getting at the moment. So if you do want to support the channel, at the moment I've only got one pledge amount of $3 a month. I mean, it's nothing really in the big scheme of things. And if everybody that listens to me, that sort of 215, 220 people, sort of gave me that $3 a month, I'd have enough to be able to produce and research one of these episodes per week. I mean, that is awesome. Now, to be able to support the page, it's patreon.podbean.com/TitanicMC. So that's patreon.podbean.com/TitanicMC. So guys, it's only $3 a month, and I really do want to continue doing this for you guys to listen to, and I love doing this type of thing. Now, let's jump into it. JP Morgan. Who is JP Morgan? Why would this man want to sink the Titanic? Okay, a lot of us have heard JP Morgan on the financial parts of the news, and the news talking about JP Morgan and stuff like that. It's indeed the same company, the same person. Now it's a company. Back in 1912, it was a person. John Pierpont Morgan. He was born into a very wealthy and already distinguished family in New England on April the 17th of 1837. So the guy, the moment he was born, he was already a rich prick. I mean, he already had the silver spoon, he already had his thumb up his nose and all that sort of thing. I mean, come on, this guy's relative. He was a founder of Yale University. I mean, you've got to think he's got a lot of coin behind him. Now, he studied in Europe, and he later sort of joined the family business, and he went into a financial career in New York. And during the 19th century, a time when the US, especially, and around the world, the railway industry was massive, and he bought into that. So look, this guy in 1912 and thereabouts, sort of from 1900, was one of the most, if not the powerfulest man in the world. He controlled everything. I mean, there are even myths and rumors around that he literally controlled the world. I mean, the US president, people like that, didn't give a damn about those. If he wanted something to happen, he would make it happen with the wealth that he had behind him. Now, he also, come on, get this, he also helped bail out the whole country of the United States of America in around 1907, I think it was. I mean, come on, what individual can bail out an entire country? This guy was extremely powerful, extremely rich, extremely influential, that to the point of, if he wanted you gone, you'd be gone like that. Now, in around 1902, I think it was, JP Morgan, along with a few other people and companies, started a group called the IMM. So the IMM was a group of companies which included the White Star Line. The White Star Line, of course, was the company that owned and managed the Olympic, the Titanic, and later on the Britannic. Now, it also had a bunch of other ships as well, but for the course of this podcast, we're just going to talk about the Titanic, obviously. Now, you've got to ask yourself, with JP Morgan essentially owning the Titanic and the company of the White Star Line, why would the guy want to sink his own ship? Now, around this sort of time, there was a lot happening in the world. Famous people like Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, people like that were inventing crap all the time. And at the time, JP Morgan was on the fence of DC current, not AC current. I'm an electrician, so I really don't know a lot about that. In home, say you turn on a light, you get AC current. That's about all I know. Now, on the flip side of that, a lot of the millionaires, well, two in particular, I believe it was, on the Titanic, was supporting Nikola Tesla and his endeavour to have AC current and free power going to the world. So the theory goes that JP Morgan, in some way or another, wanted to eliminate competition in regards to that. We'll look at the evidence shortly and see whether we can find any support of that. There's also a theory, conspiracy, however you want to look at it, that the JP Morgan was a big contributor in starting the Reserve Bank in America. I don't really know what the Reserve Bank does or how it works or anything like that. Apparently it's good. I really don't know. It's central control of money or something like that. Now, 3 of the millionaires that were on board the Titanic were apparently, I'm using inverted commas here, you can't see me, but apparently strongly opposed to this. And so the idea that JP Morgan somehow lured these 3 individuals onto a ship on her maiden voyage and deliberately had the ship sunk in the North Atlantic just to kill them and eliminate rivals, I don't know. We'll get into it when we look at the evidence and whether that could possibly be done. Another theory, there are heaps of theories here, guys, is that he swapped the ships. Now, a little bit of history here. Titanic's big sister, the Olympic, was actually involved in an accident, and which delayed the sailing of the Titanic's maiden voyage. So the insurance apparently wouldn't pay out on that accident. So the White Star Line and in turn JP Morgan were responsible for paying for the repair of the ship. Now, the theory goes is that the ships were then swapped and the Olympic, again inverted commas, pretending to be the Titanic, was sailed out to the North Atlantic on the Titanic's maiden voyage and deliberately sunk by some means or another, which we'll go into later, and the insurance was collected on that. Again, we'll look at the evidence whether that could be something that could have happened. I don't know, it's a big stretch, but hey, we'll look at the evidence, and believe me, guys, the reason it's taken me so long to get this episode out is the moment, it's like a rabbit hole. The moment you find some evidence, you keep going down and down and down and down and down. And it just goes in so many directions. JP Morgan had his finger in so many pies that it is so hard to work out where he was and how he's done things and why he's done things. And you've got to think, guys, this was in 1912. This was a hell of a long time ago, or even before that. So, I mean, the Titanic set off a maiden voyage on April the 10th, 1912. So, if he was planning to do this sort of stuff, he would have had to plan this way in advance. Because you've got to think, we've got the internet. You're listening to me on a phone, tablet, computer, or whatever at the moment, anywhere in the world. Back then, they barely had Morse code. And the way of getting things around was writing a letter, putting a seal on the back, getting a carrier to take it wherever you needed to go. So, I mean, this sort of planning would have had to be meticulous. Now, we will move on to the evidence part of this in a moment, guys, but I'm just trying to get you a handle on what this guy was like, and to know why possibly killing a few people would be of benefit for him. Okay, so theory one, JP Morgan somehow coerced Isidor Strauss, Benjamin Guggenheimer, and John Jacob Astor to go on the maiden voyage of a new ship that his company had bankrolled. Now, these three men were apparently opposed to establishing the Federal Reserve Bank in the US. Um, Now, I have done a lot of digging whether these guys were opposed to the Federal Reserve Bank, and all I can find is basically a merry-go-round on it, just the conspiracy that they were opposed, nothing about they were officially opposed to it. Now, let's just say, for example, well, sorry, we'll step back one step there. Now, apparently, at the time of the sinking of the Titanic, it was reported, and I found this in a few newspapers dating back to 1912, 1911, that all opposition to the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank had been resolved. So at the time of the sinking, there would have been no reason to knock these three guys off. Now, okay, these three guys were obviously smart individuals. You've got three millionaires. You've got the creation of Macy's store. You've got iron ore magnates. You've got a lot of sort of smarts when it comes to these three guys. And they would have known JP Morgan. They would have been around the same sort of circles. And if he somehow coerced these three guys to get on a boat that he was going to sink with another 1,500 odd people on it, I mean, come on, these guys aren't that stupid to do that. And how would he make sure that these three individuals would be staying on board or would indeed die in the sinking of the ship? Now, he could sink the ship, but these three guys could have got on the back of a life raft, could have survived in any particular way or fashion. Now, at the time, it was women and children first, and JP Morgan, I guess, knowing that Titanic didn't have adequate lifeboats for everybody on board, would have assumed, I guess, these gentlemen, being gentlemen, would not have boarded a lifeboat. Jeez, it's a lot of assumptions to make, isn't it? That you would have had to make sure the Titanic was in the correct location to hit an iceberg. Well, okay. In one of the theories, it didn't actually hit an iceberg. It ran into the Californian, which was a ship also owned by the IMM. And apparently it sank after that collision. Now, the Californian did make it back to harbour without a problem. The Californian was reportedly about 15 miles away from the Titanic when she sank. JP Morgan apparently made sure that the Titanic had white flares for emergencies and not red. This guy would have had to have his finger in every pie launching of the ship. He would have navigation, everything like that. I mean, it's not impossible, but I don't see it as being conceivable that he would have used this way to assassinate three guys. I mean, a guy with the amount of power that JP Morgan had, he wouldn't have gone to that length to assassinate three guys when he wanted to form something. He just would have went and hired somebody, caused a crash on land, a train to derail. I mean, there's so many easier ways that he could have achieved this same thing. But saying that, I found no evidence at all that that at this time that these three guys were opposed to it. Unfortunately, yes, the three individuals did pass away on the Titanic. And yes, JP Morgan did cancel his sailing on the Titanic at the very last moment. Very fishy. Coincidental? I don't know, but I don't actually believe that he arranged the sinking of the Titanic to assassinate Isidor Strauss, Benjamin Guggenheimer, and John Jacob Astor. It just seems very convoluted. Guys, what do you think? Hit me back on the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Show me some evidence if I've missed something. So next up, guys, we have the idea that JP Morgan actually arranged to have the Titanic swapped with her sister ship, the Olympic. Now, the reason behind this is that the Olympic, her sister ship, was actually damaged a year earlier than the launch of the Titanic, in a collision with the Royal Navy ship Hawke, where an inquiry found that the Hawke was not at fault, but the Olympic was, and the insurer would not pay out. So it is thought that JP Morgan and his cronies and people around him arranged to have the Titanic, which was still under construction at the time, when the Olympic was brought in for repairs, which actually slowed down the completion of the Titanic, which could be part of the conspiracy, I guess, to have them swapped over. So they patched up the Olympic as best as they could, changed the name over to the Titanic, and set her off with her new name, Titanic, off on the maiden voyage. Now, the idea behind this was that there was actually no one going to be killed, that there was a rescue ship all ready to be set up out in the location where they were going to sink the Titanic. But apparently what happened was the Titanic actually, or Olympic in inverted commas, actually ran into this darkened ship that was meant to save them. Bloody convoluted, isn't it? To get to the point of just sinking the Olympic that was meant to be the Titanic, very convoluted way of doing it. So the idea was it would sink slowly, rescue ships would be there to pick people up, blah blah blah, all good. Now, I haven't really been able to find how the ship would have sank. Was it meant to hit the iceberg? Was something pre-arranged? I don't know. I mean, again, if JP Morgan obviously was going to lose out on the money for the insurance of the Olympic, but if you wanted to have something happen to the Olympic, why not just have it happen to the Olympic? Sink the Olympic, collect the insurance on that ship. Now, the insurance that was actually collected on the Titanic afterwards was nowhere near, or was actually a lot less than what the Titanic was actually worth. So that actual theory is, well, pretty much bunkers. And every item that's been bought up from the wreck of the Titanic had Titanic's construction number on it, 401. And Olympic's construction number was 400. So everywhere on the wreck that they found has 401. There's no 400s there anywhere. So that really disproves that myth straight away, doesn't it? That the Olympic was the Titanic. Now, we will go deeper into that in another episode because it is an episode of its own. But I don't know, it really does debunk that in my mind. I'd love to know your thoughts, whether there's evidence that you've seen that I missed or anything along those lines. Let me know. Now, another theory or conspiracy that I've come up with and found, it's reported that John Jacob Astor, who passed away on the Titanic, being a multimillionaire, he invested just over $100,000 at the time, which is a buttload of money, in Nikola Tesla. Now, if you want to know more about Nikola Tesla and his life, look it up. Jump on to another conspiracy channel called Those Conspiracy Guys and look for Nikola Tesla's episode. Bloody fantastic bit of listening. And Gordo and the guys that are on there are fantastic as well. Now, the conspiracy goes that because Nikola Tesla and JP Morgan were in different camps. JP Morgan was in the DC camp of direct current, and Nikola Tesla, who was the inventor of AC current, JP Morgan wanted to keep his monopoly. So he decided to sink the ship and make sure John Jacob Astor would die on the ship. Now, that one would have been hard to do in the meantime. There's a lot of easier ways to knock off a person, like we said in a few other ways. But the whole issue of the, as they call it, the current wars was way over before the sinking of the Titanic. So while John Jacob Astor did die on the Titanic, and he was an investor in Nikola Tesla, there's no rhyme or reason why Morgan would have sank the Titanic just to get rid of an investor in a project that, funny enough, he actually invested money in as well. So, I mean, that's a bit of a strange one, to say the least, of the weirdest conspiracies through JP Morgan. Now, guys, I've gone through so much stuff, looked at so many YouTube channels, documentaries and stuff like that. And when you're actually looking up, did JP Morgan actually sink the Titanic? Look, JP Morgan was a ruthless businessman. There's no ifs or buts about it. He cared about money. He cared about what would make him more money. From what I can tell, he didn't care about making the human race better or anything like that. But did he deliberately sink the Titanic? If I had to get off the fence and say yes or no, from what I've been able to find, he didn't. There's just no concrete evidence that he sunk the Titanic. Was the Titanic ill-equipped at the time? Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a lot on the Titanic that should have happened. I mean, when the Titanic struck the iceberg and started to go down, they used white flares, which is well known in the Titanic story. White flares normally indicate that they were having a party. So any ship that was close enough, for example, the Californian, which was reportedly only about 15 miles away, which is about 30 kilometres, they apparently did see the flares and was later ridiculed because they didn't go to help the Titanic. Now, if those flares were red, it's a good chance they would have went to the aid of the Titanic. But that's another problem that they had there. Now, obviously there wasn't the binoculars in the crow's nest because of the changeover at last minute of some crew on the Titanic. And that crew member actually took the key to the cupboard. Now, you would think, okay, we need those binoculars, so we'll break the cupboard open. At the time, if you went to do that or damage any White Star Line property, that money would come out of your wage. So you wouldn't want any money to come out of your wage, so they didn't. They just let it be. And obviously, you would think if they would have had those binoculars, they would have been able to see a bit further. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, you've got conditions on the ocean that night that was very, very rare. That most people that sail would have said and did say that they hadn't seen before. And normally the people in the crow's nest were able to see icebergs a fair way off because the water was knocking up against the icebergs. In the conditions that the Titanic found itself in that night, that just didn't happen. Now, there's still a lot we need to look at to do with the conspiracies of Titanic. There's a lot of things around it. But in this case, I've got to say, I've got to give the credit to JP Morgan that even though he cancelled at the last minute and didn't travel, I don't think he deliberately sunk the Titanic. Guys, if you've got any other websites, evidence or whatever, just shoot it to me. I'll be happy to have a look and add it to the webpage on Facebook and stuff like that. The webpage hopefully will be up soon because I've just been flat out with my other business. So if you can support the channel by throwing a few dollars in, even $1 a month to help support the channel. If you go to the Patreon connection, I'll have all that information down in the show notes. But guys, let me know what you thought of the show, and hopefully I will have the next episode out a lot quicker than I had this one out. Guys, you have a lovely evening, day, morning, or whenever you listen to the episode, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Thanks for listening, guys, and until next time.